Combating mental health stigmas, presented by Project Balanced, sheds light on stories that provide unique insight on how to overcome mental health struggles, support ones in need, and what the path to recovery is like. Through these conversations, we hope to uplift mental health talk, encourage reaching out for help, and share how communities can reshape the notion of what being healthy truly means. My name is Faith Lee. And my name is Hope Lee, co founders of Project Balanced. Today, we will be interviewing Jason Wood, the Director of Community Engagement at ANAD, the National Association of Anorexia Nervosa and Associated Disorders, which is a nonprofit focused on eating disorder prevention and a free peer support system that helps anyone struggling with an eating disorder. Thank you so much for coming on with us. I want to start by asking if you could please introduce yourself, so your role and what your work involves at ANAD.
Yeah, so I am Jason Wood. I am the Director of Community Engagement at ANID. I was diagnosed with an eating disorder back in 2020. And since that time, I've just been on a mission to raise awareness and to share my story and to help others. And one thing kind of led to another. I found myself here at ANID a couple years ago. And what's really cool is that I have an opportunity to build our community and get it out there so that more people are aware of the peer support resources that we offer. Also being able to help other people get involved, such as our student ambassador program or through our collaborations and our partnerships, just trying to really confront the stigma, the stereotypes around eating disorders and normalize a lot of these conversations.
Yeah. And with recovery, like we know it's a very deep personal journey and there's a lot of like ups and downs that come with it. But for you personally, or just even in general with people you've worked with, like what does recovery mean to you or look like? And how has that like meaning evolved like over time?
Yeah, one of the things, well, I think when I first started my journey, I was like, okay, recovery is like this destination, and I'm going to get there one day, and it's just going to be like, I'm completely free of all eating disorder thoughts, and it's just in the past. The thing that I've learned throughout my recovery journey is that it's more of a journey, that it's not a destination, and that I will probably live in recovery for the rest of my life. And that kind of means there will always be those challenges that come up along the way. That eating disorder voice doesn't completely go away for me. It's still there at times, but I'm able to talk back to it. I'm able to fight back. I'm able to work through it with the resources that I gained throughout my healing and my treatment. So to me, the one thing that I've learned in recovery is that it looks different for everybody. For some people, they do believe they're in full recovery, and for other people, they kind of feel like they're in that in-between area where it's like, okay, I'm not dealing with the eating disorder anymore, but it's still not completely gone either. So it's been quite an individual, personalized experience, I guess you could say. But it's one of those things that um, I've definitely gotten my life back. And I would say if I had to sum up recovery like in a short phrase or anything like that, it's just the act of getting your life back. And that's exactly what it's been like the last couple of years.
Yeah. Wow, that's very powerful. Yeah, that's very, very powerful. And it's amazing to hear someone as you experience an eating disorder yourself and like yes, it's hard and you'll probably, you'll live with that for the rest of your life, but you can learn to move forward and have those distractions and learn that life is about living. And I think a lot of people don't understand how difficult eating disorders can be and how it's the journey. You don't just find your destination, like you will go through challenges and you might relapse, but they're often surrounded by harmful stigmas and stereotypes. So, if you could answer, how can communities promote awareness in a way that challenges those misconceptions and fosters understanding?
Yeah, I think first of all, we've got to have the conversations. I know that I've talked to some student ambassadors along the way whose schools just will not even touch the topic of eating disorders. And
Mhm.
I run into a lot of community organizations in different places where they just don't want to have this conversation because there's so much shame and stigma out there. There's this misconception that it's just a choice or that a certain subset of people develop an eating disorder. So it begins, I think, with just having the conversation in general. and making sure that people understand that eating disorders are a mental health concern. They're not a physical health condition. Yes, they have physical symptoms and they have physical side effects and things like that, but it starts in our minds. And that it's the same as any other mental health concern that we're talking about these days. I was recently talking to somebody, and she used one of my favorite phrases for this, and this was the first time I ever heard it, but it's, I caught an eating disorder, similar to I caught a cold or I caught the flu. And that's exactly what it is. Like, it's not a choice. And we've got to be able to break through that barrier, I think, before we even start the additional conversations where we do go into the fact that it can happen to anybody, that there is no shame in this. There is no shame in asking for help, and there is no shame in sharing our stories. And that's one of the things that I think we all have responsibility for these days. Because if you've battled an eating disorder and then you get to a place in recovery and you're like, okay, I'm good. Like, I want to leave this part of my life behind. Maybe share your story, even if it's just through a blog one time, or you don't have to get completely involved in the field like I have. Just share your story because you never know who needs to hear it. And I think it's through that storytelling that we're going to break a lot of that shame, break a lot of those stigmas and stereotypes.
Yeah, definitely like with these stereotypes, especially within teenagers and high school and social media and all these ideas that surrounding like everyone's minds are still growing. So like you hear one thing and it's okay, I'm gonna see that as okay, that must be true.
Mhm.
And that's really hard to getting people involved in general, just because people might be busy with their daily lives or might not take it seriously. And so I feel like that can cause people to kind of like fear reaching out, and it can be intimidating too because of the societal expectations or just in general like opening up about it and being able to like just be able to ask for help, because I know it's really hard for young adults and just anyone in general. But what would you say to someone who's like afraid to ask for support, and how can we create spaces as teenagers at like in high school, even in college, like as a space for people to feel safe and comfortable opening up?
Yeah, I think the strongest thing that somebody can do is to reach out for help and say, I can't do this on my own. It seems so easy. I'm one of those very like independent people. It's very hard for me to delegate things or to do anything like that. I want to do everything myself.
Mhm.
But the one thing that I realized very early on is that I can't recover from an eating disorder by myself. And we see that at Anit all the time. And that's why we kind of have that community-based support system so that we can be in groups or that we can call somebody else who just gets it and who has been there. So I think being able to reach out for help and admitting that you don't have to do this alone is just a huge first step in moving forward. Now, if you're a loved one or a friend, and you're supporting that individual, I always say the best thing to do is to just listen. And that is a great way to create that safe, that welcoming, comforting place because we can often want to jump in and fix everybody else's problems. It's just I think it's human nature. I know for me personally, anytime I see somebody in pain, anytime I see somebody struggling, I want to fix it. But
Mhm.
with an eating disorder, it's not that simple. So sometimes you've just got to give them the space where they know they have an outlet. They know they have somebody they can talk to, they can vent to on those tough days, they can celebrate on those good days. And to me, that's really, really important.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely.
And with that, what is one message or guidance you would offer someone who is in a difficult place right now? I know you mentioned a bunch of how our community can support each other,
Mhm.
but as a more internal perspective, what would be like the main thing that you think everyone should know, or someone who's really struggling that could maybe give them some type of motivation?
Yeah. Two things come to mind right away here, so it's hard to pick one. So I'm going to share two. But
Of
the
course.
first one is that don't fool yourself into thinking you're not sick enough. Oftentimes, I think that's a big barrier to a lot of us reaching out for help is that we simply don't think it's that bad or we don't think we're that sick. But if you're having any type of food or body image distress, and it's impacting your life in even the slightest way, reach out to somebody, talk to somebody. It's okay to ask for help in those situations. And then the second thing that I would say is to give yourself some self-compassion and some grace. Again, it is so easy to comfort a friend, to comfort a loved one if they're going through a difficult time. But when we're going through a difficult time, we're often our own worst enemies. We're our biggest critics. So in those moments, be kind to yourself. View yourself the way that your best friend would view you. View yourself the way your pet would view you. View yourself through that lens of love. And that can go a really long way in healing and being able in the first place to even ask for help.
Yeah, of course. And I definitely like agree with that. And with internally, even with everyone around you and your supports, it can be hard just in general, like being able to overcome those battles you face without anyone knowing. And also too, within school, I know like with health class and PE class, like they teach you certain, if they do teach you about eating disorders or if they do teach you about these mental health disorders, a lot of times they almost magnify it and make it seem like such opposite ends of the spectrum as like even for our school, our community, how would you say we like anyone out there who's trying to make a difference? And I know like it's hard to kind of reform those ideas with the school curriculum, but just being able to change those ideas into a healthier perspective.
Yeah, I would say use your voices, use your stories. Stories are a big way right there. Kind of rely on the peer support model in like an awareness advocacy mode. Here at ANID, we provide the peer support in forms of support groups and helplines and things like that. But I think when it comes to awareness and advocacy, that peer model also kind of plays a factor. Like have a little group, maybe start a book club, like do something that you can where it's just peers talking to each other, because oftentimes that can be a really safe first step for somebody who might be struggling to recognize, hey, something's going on. Maybe I need to talk to somebody else, or maybe that's finally where they establish the trust with you and they can come to you. And if you can share it with anybody, that's a great first step. It doesn't always have to be go directly to the counselor or go directly to a teacher. Like share it with somebody, kind of build that community and continue to grow, eventually get to the point where you're reaching out to professionals and providers, but just create those small groups. And that can be a great place to start. Also, I would say continue to put some pressure on school leadership, on faculty, talk to the district, talk to the leaders at your school, talk to the counseling departments, because eating disorders are often overlooked and they're also run away from.
Mhm.
People think if I'm not a specialist in eating disorders, then I got to get far away from it because I could do more harm than good. But the truth is, all of us can be helpful to somebody who's struggling with any type of eating disorder. Simply going back to what I was saying about listening, just being able to listen or being able to know what resources are available. If a friend comes to you about an eating disorder and you don't know what to do next, tell them about ANID, tell them about Project Heal, tell them about one of the nonprofits that are out there, and you can at least get that process going for them.
Yeah.
So I'd say making sure that your schools are aware of the resources that are out there and aware of the fact that even the smallest thing can make a big difference in somebody's life. So they don't have to go to these extremes. Somebody doesn't have to be super sick and immediately be like put in the hospital. Somebody could just have some anxiety and some fear around food, and that person, maybe they just need somebody to talk to.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think they need to realize that this is a mental health issue and it should not be overlooked. Just like depression and anxiety. Like, yes, it's hard to accept that you might be dealing with that, but I think it needs to be supported. And just like you said, like you should make groups, and it can be a very emotional process, but it should motivate and encourage people to know that, like, wow, like I'm not the only one. There's other people around me, and like this is real.
Yeah.
This is a part of life, and this is not something that you should be shameful of.
I do have a question kind of going on to that too. I know with diet culture too, it almost normalizes disordered eating and eating disorders. Like it steers people away from actually advocating it and advocating for this is a mental health illness, not just about your body or not just about food. Like it's a whole scope of different things that come together. How would you say, like, maybe for your recovery or just in general, like the people around like our community, how can we, instead of steering towards normalizing that through diet culture, like normalize actually um like going towards helping people who are struggling because I feel people are sensitive almost towards it and they steer away from it.
Yeah, yeah. So for starters, I think it all begins with the way that we're talking and the way that we're handling ourselves in those situations. Because diet culture is everywhere, and we're all guilty of it at some point of kind of normalizing that narrative that's out there, saying, "Ooh, I'm going to be good and do this," or "I'm going to be bad and do this," or just small statements like that. So if we're mindful of saying it ourselves, then we can go out and maybe teach some of our friends about that and just say, hey, this doesn't even really have anything to do with eating disorders necessarily, but will you help me in the fight against diet culture, the fight against wellness culture? Let's break away from that. I think that that's a really important thing. And then two, focusing in on like a holistic approach to health and really promoting that at school. Again, you don't have to necessarily go into the specifics about eating disorders, but you can just ask people, what are you doing for your mental health? What are you doing for your emotional health? What are you doing for your spiritual health? All these different healths that comprise our well-being. And maybe take a little bit of that focus off of physical health, because for so long we've allowed that to become the sole factor of whether we're healthy or not, whether our diet and exercise seem to define our well-being. But we now know that that's not the case. Like it's a collective thing. So I think focusing in on those conversations and redirecting conversations when maybe health talk does get really minute into diet and exercise, and make sure that you also say, hey, mental health also matters, emotional health matters, all of these different things also, our social health, all of those different things.
Yeah. Definitely. That was very helpful, like with kind of having an idea of how we can spread this message to our school, also our community, and anyone else out there like listening to this or our friends too, like being able to have a more open mind towards mental health and eating disorders in general, because I know it's such a sensitive topic. And I feel like we've almost created this idea that it's people are almost afraid to talk about it, maybe if they're afraid to say the wrong thing or they don't think it's that big of a deal. But hearing from someone who's gone through recovery, hearing from someone who is working with a nonprofit organization who specializes in helping people struggle with mental health, it's very helpful like being able to hear from your perspective. But I just wanted to thank you again so much for taking this opportunity and coming on this podcast with us.
Yes,
Very helpful.
really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.